Welcome to the Marconi Project, an oral history series of the Italian American Museum of Washington, D.C. In these interviews, we capture the memories and experiences of Italian immigrants and Italian Americans in the nation's capital. We are ready to hear your story.
Good morning, Peggy. Thank you for coming. This is the Marconi Project interview. We are interviewing Peggy Floria on today, Sunday, February the 8th, 2026, and I am Elizabeth D. Gregorio. Okay, so Peggy, thank you so much for joining us. We wanted to welcome you to the Italian American Museum of Washington, D.C., and especially to the Marconi Project. Peggy Floria and her father, son of Salvatore and Serena, his name is Angelo Floria, gave a very, very generous donation to the museum, the collection of Dr. Salvatore Floria, who you will get to know a lot more during this interview. There was a Voce article in August of 2025 that featured Peggy's grandparents and their ties to D.C. and to Holy Rosary Church, and it engendered a lot of discussion. So today, Peggy is going to fill in quite a few blanks for us. A little bit about Peggy. She is the granddaughter of Dr. Salvatore Enrico Floria and Serena Rosaria Floria, née Balsano, and the daughter of Angelo Anthony Floria and Rita R. Floria. She is the first woman on either side of her family to have more than a high school education. Her connection to her grandmother, her nonna, and her passion for cooking developed at an early age while watching her grandmother cook meals. To honor her grandparents, she continues her studies in Italian and makes her grandmother's Christmas cookies. Miss Floria and her father's donation of Dr. Floria's artifacts to the IMDC Museum reflect a deep understanding of the importance of preserving the crucial contributions of Italian Americans to the Washington, D.C. diaspora. Peggy, thank you for participating in the Marconi Project interview. So the hour is yours. And for the record, would you please state your full name and your relationship to your grandparents?
My full name is Peggy Therese Floria. I am the granddaughter of Salvatore Enrico Floria and Serena Rosaria Floria, and the daughter of Angelo Anthony Floria and Rita R. Floria of Silver Spring, Maryland. I was born in Silver Spring, Maryland, and I grew up in the same house that my father grew up in since 1942. It is the same house that Dr. Floria purchased in that time frame. So I grew up in the same house that my father grew up in once they moved out of D.C.
Okay, great. Peggy, this is a story about your grandparents today and also the generational connection. When you think about your grandparents, this is a two-part question for you. When you think about your grandparents, what's kind of the first feeling or image that comes to mind? And then also, we know that you've done a lot of organizing for this story and preparing. And tell us also about the process you went through to get the story in a shape where it's tellable and relatable and current.
Right. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I think I have two separate memories that if I had to say were the first ones that I ever remember, they are more, one is visual, one is oral, and what I mean by that is my first visual memory of my grandmother was with my mother. I went downstairs one night because I heard a commotion as a child, and I walked into the very small kitchen, and my mother and my grandmother were kneeling on the kitchen floor with rolling pins and towels and blanched almonds in between the towels, and using the rolling pins to beat the almonds small enough so that they could be used in making the pasticciotto cookies that my grandmother made every single year. And so I remember coming downstairs and watching my mother and my grandmother rolling pins on top of towels where the actual almonds were on the floor of the kitchen. So that is my first visual memory. I have another one going up to visit my grandmother where she lived in New Jersey, and flowers, because she was a great devotee of flowers. She could name all of the roses, the hybrid tea roses that she had, both in Silver Spring and up in Pennsville, New Jersey. So that was another memory. And I think the oral memory I have is being told about victory gardens. I think one of my seminal understandings of the need to preserve and engage with food, what came from the tales of victory gardens during the war that I listened to.
So I know you did a lot of prep work. So tell us a little bit about your resources and how you organize this and how you delved into their history to tell the story today.
Yeah, so here is, and I don't know if this is going to ever be captured, but this is the actual manuscript that my father put together of the entirety of the Floria family, not just the grandparents, but his growing up, etc. And so because this is a documentary that centers on my grandparents, the first thing I did was I extracted all references to my grandparents throughout the entire manual. Since this is not digital, I had to transpose them over from that book to a written format which I could answer questions here. And the references are sprinkled throughout the book, so it was a matter of extraction through hundreds of pages. It's also the research I did finding photographs that were relevant to the discussion, and also identifying appropriate resources and appropriate artifacts that could be donated to the IAMDC in service to the memory of my grandparents.
You've done a lot of work and it shows. I want to talk to you now a little bit about their Italian roots, immigrating to the United States, how they got here. One of the things that we do in the museum and with the Marconi Project is to tell the story, because once the story is told, muscle memory kicks in and people remember. So now tell us a little bit about how your grandparents' background, their arrival to America, some of their lives, early days in New York, moving here. Make them come alive for us.
Sure. So, as I mentioned earlier, much of what I'm going to discuss was extracted out of my father's book. So, if it sounds a little bit stilted at some points, I would just beg your indulgence here. My grandfather's family, Dr. Salvatore Enrico Floria's family, moved from Vicari to Roccapalumba, Sicily, before he was born on Thursday, May 22nd, 1884. Shortly thereafter, the family moved to Caltanissetta. His father, Dr. Floria's father, was Giuseppe Floria, and his mother was Rosa Scaglione. He was the youngest of 5 brothers, Joseph, George, Tony, and Phil, all of whom immigrated to the United States, and one sister whose name is unknown. Grandpa Floria, or Dr. Floria, was the last to arrive in the United States because he was the youngest, and he was the only one to be formally educated of all of them. All the other brothers were barbers. At 17 years of age, in 1901, Grandpa Floria attended college in Catania, Sicily, where he doubled up on credits and completed 4 years of pre-med studies in 2 years. His parents moved to Catania to make a home for their son. At age 19 in 1903, shortly after his mother's death, he attended the University of Naples with his father in tow. He became a physician in June 1909 at age 25, and the IAMDC has Dr. Floria's certificate from the University of Naples that he received in July of 1909. The document was certified by Caspar S. Crowninshield, the consul of the United States in Naples, Italy, on the 16th of August, 1909, and the IAMDC also is in possession of this document. Dr. Floria immigrated to the United States via steamship to Ellis Island in September 1910, where he was reunited with his 4 brothers and immediately taken to Washington, D.C., where his brothers lived. In October 1910, he was accepted as a staff physician at the Raybrook Tuberculosis Hospital in New York. After this time, Grandpa Floria was transferred to the West Haverstraw State Hospital for crippled children outside of New York City, which is now known as the Helen Hayes Rehabilitation Hospital. He applied to be admitted to the D.C. Medical Board. He took the exam, failed the exam because it was in English, which he could not read, he could not write, or he could not speak. 3 months later, and 5 months after his arrival, circa early 1911, he took the exam again and passed. He received his certificate in September 1912 from the D.C. Medical Board, and the IMDC has that as well. He returned to Washington, D.C., and this date is unclear, built private practice, and became beloved amongst the Italian immigrant population. As part of his practice, he was selected to become a doctor to the Italian embassy, but this date is unknown. Due to a miracle cure of Ferdinando di Savoia, a direct descendant of the House of Savoia, and I will add here that I could not discern who this exactly was, but I did research with AI, and based on the AI research, I speculate that this individual is identifiable with Ferdinando di Savoia, the Prince of Udine, who lived from 1884 to 1963, and I will explain why. It is the only Ferdinando di Savoia who could have been a contemporary of my grandfather and had a chance of crossing paths with my grandfather. Why do I say that? Because Prince Ferdinando led the Italian War Commission to the United States in May of 1917, when my grandfather was already in the district, and continued to represent the Italian royal family into the 20th century. Since the prince's only known sustained time in D.C. was in May of 1917, I speculate that Grandpa Floria must have treated him at that time. According to my father's book, the Italian ambassador appreciated Grandpa Floria's work so much that he had an office built for him on the embassy grounds. The IAMDC has in its possession King Vittorio Emanuele's appointment of Grandpa Floria as consul in residence from Italy to Washington on 10 June 1919. Therefore, I speculate that the dates are actually accurate and correspond. It's correlative proof. It's not necessarily causal proof. I speculate that all of this must have been a result of Grandpa Floria's treatment of Prince Ferdinando di Savoia, the Prince of Udine, which is the only historical match that I assess is the most accurate and correlates. And that is Grandpa Floria's. That's the initial Grandpa Floria piece that I have.
Please tell us more about Grandma Floria.
Right. So Grandma Floria, and I will also caveat, so far it is as it is known. She was born on Sunday, 11 November 1900 at Piazza Municipio 2, now called Piazza Paolo Borsellino in Vicari, Sicily. I say so far as it is known because my father found a separate birth certificate listing her birth year as 1898. According to my father's book, Grandma Floria was either born on 11 November 1900 or 11 November 1898, depending on which birth certificate you decide to look at, before she took them both away from my father, and he never found them again. I suspect that it's probably that it's one or the other. We will never really truly know. When she arrived in the United States in 1912, at age 12 or age 14, new labor laws would not allow her to work. So I suspect that there might have been an adjustment of some ilk to compensate for the age issue. Her name was Serena Rosaria Balsano, but apparently she was originally named Rosaria Balsamo, though at this point it is uncertain which is her true name. Additionally, all of these names could be complete mistakes from transcriptions from that time period. Her father was Angelo Balsano, a gentleman farmer who owned land with olive groves and was an only child, and Giuseppina Anzalone, also an only child. Grandma Floria was one of 7 children, and she would always start these conversations with me. She would say, I was one of 7 children, or we were 7 children. She would start her stories that way. She lived with her maternal grandmother for a period of time. Grandma Floria had a 4th grade education, then was educated as a seamstress, then later attended fashion design school. She and her entire family immigrated to New York on Friday, May 10th, 1912. They traveled directly from Palermo to New York City on the Hamburg American line. They landed on a West Side Manhattan pier and settled into the Bensonhurst section of Brooklyn. I believe the address, if I am not mistaken, is 1634 77th Street, but I do not know that for absolute certainty. Grandpa and Grandma Floria's parents, repeat, Grandpa and Grandma Floria's, they're each of their sides, parents knew each other, but Grandma Floria and Grandpa Floria never met before coming to America. She works as a seamstress and eventually went to fashion design school and designed dresses. They were married at St. Rosalia Church, 6301 14th Avenue in Brooklyn, by Father Pompatio di Rienzo on February the 26th, 1929, with his best friend, Francesco Quattrone, as best man, and Grandma Floria's sisters Rose as the maid of honor. The IAMDC has this photograph, their wedding photograph. So the other individuals in the photo, apart from Grandma Floria and Grandpa Floria, are Francesco Quattrone as the best man, Grandma Floria's sister Rose as the maid of honor. I assume Grandma moved into where Grandpa Floria had his medical practice at 943 Massachusetts Avenue, very close to here, as a matter of fact. So that's everything I've got in terms of the background prior to living together in Washington, D.C.
And I know we've talked about this, and for the record, when especially the young people who listen to this, probably don't think what it took to go to school, to be a female, and to go to college in the 1920s, and so it was really groundbreaking for her to do that. An immigrant, going to school, getting a fashion design degree. The dress is beautiful. We don't know, if she made the dress, but it's a real message to young women today people who take this for granted. But that was really groundbreaking to go to school at that time and to get a degree.
It was, and it really, really speaks to the type of individual my grandmother was, which was very much of the understanding that if she was going to make it in this world, she was going to have to do it for herself first, so that she could be in service to her husband and to the community. She was going to have to be able to make her own money and handle her own affairs, and get her own materials and sew her own dresses to be able to have what she needed.
A role model.
And
yeah.
Yes. And I think that that's something that also is useful for future generations is the idea is that life was not handed to either of my grandparents. My grandfather being the only individual who had an education out of his 5 brothers. And my grandmother, who took it upon herself to have work when she could have easily said, I'm going to just be the wife of Dr. Floria, and she chose not to do that.
And Peggy, one thing about your grandfather that came to note, we did not realize it, but we also own his microscope. We have
correct.
that into the collection. And early on, we had one of the only botanical illustrator at the Smithsonian come for a tour, and she looked at the microscope, and she was so impressed because it was of such a high quality, and it is of such a high quality that her comment to us was, even the Smithsonian doesn't have something as nice as this.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, so it's really the crown jewel, along with the medals of the collection.
I appreciate it. I was honored that my parents chose me out of the three kids to hold on to the artifacts belonging to my grandparents.
Grateful.
Yes.
We're very grateful. Let's turn a little more internal now into the community. And we know that in so many ways, your grandfather in particular embodied the best of the Italian immigrant. Ties to the community, forging the community, being part of Holy Rosary Church, a big part of Holy Rosary Church, and of course to his family, and to the greater Italian immigrant at large, in addition to the embassy team that was here. So it was fully rounded resume, if you wish. Tell us a little bit more about stories you may have heard, what you know about. We have this wonderful picture of him at the dedication of Holy Rosary Church in 1923. He's front and center. They lived on Mass, and then they moved to Maryland. I mean, for the embassy to create an office for him, unheard of today. And then some of his other local stories of how he spent his Saturdays, tending to fellow Italian immigrants and their medical needs. Tell us a little bit more about his practice and their whole dedication and involvement with the community.
Absolutely. Dr. Floria and Grandma Floria lived at 943 Mass Avenue Northwest, where Georgetown University now has its campus. And he saw patients at his home. The hand-painted sign on the front window read, Dr. Salvatore E. Floria, 943 Massachusetts Avenue, office hours, Monday through Friday, 10 to 12 and 2 to 4, and Saturday, 10 to 12. Grandpa Floria also did hospital rounds before office hours and saw patients in their homes after office hours. It was a small, dark brown brick 2-floor row house with both floors having identical floor patterns. Grandpa Floria's office was on the first floor. The home was on the second floor. You entered a tiny foyer with a stairway on the far left to the second floor. A door to the right was the waiting room. A door at the end of the hallway led to the doctor's office, with a full bathroom, an examination room which doubled as the children's bedrooms, Dr. Floria's office which doubled as he and his wife's bedroom, his laboratory and his storage area, and on the second floor there was a porch, but there was no real backyard. My father would say that you could smell disinfectants on the first floor and wonderful food on the second floor. They had a huge black fig tree in the front yard, surrounded by a black wrought iron fence. In the rear was a green fig tree. At the corner of 10th Street and Mass Avenue, there was a police box that contained a telephone, and the horse could drink out of the green cast iron trough, fed by the city water system next to the call box. Turned in the corner on 10th Street, there was a tiny mom-and-pop convenience store, and my father, Angelo Floria, had an unlimited line of credit for candy. Mr. Fowler, the owner of the convenience store, would make a notation every time my father would visit and would present my grandfather with the bill. Air raid sirens sounded every day at noon. Grandpa Floria was described by my father as 5'3", 193 pounds, with a goatee and wore a pince-nez, which the IAMDC has. My father described him as someone who could, quote, influence the room, unquote, upon entering. He insisted that all conversation in front of his children would be in formal Italian and not Sicilian. He had false teeth that would click when eating cheese. He was a gentle man who didn't let little things bother him, and he loved and respected Grandma Floria. He drove a royal blue 4-door 1941 Chrysler Windsor sedan. During World War II, everyone had a sticker on their car to indicate how gas should be rationed. Grandpa Floria had a C sticker on his car because he was a physician and needed to be able to get to his office, and his patients house calls only, and the hospital. However, it is telling of my grandfather that when he would take the children and his wife to visit relatives up in Brooklyn for Christmas, instead of driving and using gas, the family took the train. Grandma Floria would mop the examining room and bathroom with disinfectant twice a day. Grandpa Floria did his own lab work with his microscope, which the IAMDC has. And Grandpa Floria once took my father to the old soldiers' home in 1943, where my father met Civil War patients who were patients of my grandfather. It is also knowledge that my grandfather was the physician to the original owner of A. Lettery's nearby here. So what would happen is my father would tell me the story that my grandfather would take my father to see Mr. Lettery, and Grandpa Floria would go into the back room and allegedly see patients back there. What is suspected is more than likely a little bit of wine may have occurred for health beneficial purposes entirely, and my father would have a snack in the front while my grandfather, quote, worked, unquote, with the Lettery family. I am sure that he treated them. It's just very funny because that is an ongoing story. And so years later, when my father was already in his 80s, I took my father downtown to Lettery's. He had not been in decades. And I took him down there and we got sandwiches. It was just he and I. And he was able to walk the floors of Lettery's for the very first time in decades. And it was really a meaningful experience for him. We came back, we went and bought the sandwiches and came back and just had wine and sandwiches from Lettery's. So that was a really great memory from that. So the move to Hillendale, circa 1942. When he and Grandma Floria moved to Hillendale, Maryland, he commuted and worked Monday through Friday and half-day Saturday. They moved to 310 Nagley Road, which is now known as 10310 Nagley Road. Grandpa Floria decided to move the family out to Silver Spring at that point in time to get away from racial tension, which was impacting where he lived and the neighborhood in general at that time. The house was chosen because it had a master bedroom and a studio on the first floor that Grandpa Floria could use as an office. Moving to Hillendale took guts. At the time, it was isolated and referred to as the country. There was no garage and no paved driveway. There was a garage, but no paved driveway. Grandma Floria wasted no time in going to Center Market, where she bought azaleas, rhododendrons, English backwoods from Bolgiano and Sons, who were patients of Dr. Floria. She planted a victory garden with squash, eggplant, tomatoes, and radishes. Grandma Floria, my father's words, that little Italian immigrant, showed everyone what hard work and perseverance could achieve. Grandpa Floria would come home and marvel at the work that Grandma Floria had done with the house. Grandma Floria, a human dynamo at 41, had accomplished miracles and made a house a home. Grandpa Floria, apparently healthy and 57, continued to work in the city but now lived in the country. Dreams were fulfilled. Grandpa Floria, in September of 1943, started to suffer a series of minor, quote, strokes. And during the last year of his life was becoming progressively paralyzed and infirm to the point where my grandmother had to drive him back and forth from the office. There was no medication to control high blood pressure at that time. And being a physician, Grandpa Floria knew he was dying. Grandma Floria was now driving Grandpa Floria back and forth to work. Grandma Floria ministered to her husband, whose kidneys had shut down, and he was dying from progressive uremia. His final hemorrhage was massive and fatal, but cruelly, it was not immediately fatal. Aunt Anna, my grandmother's sister, arrived from Brooklyn to care for my father and Uncle Joe, his brother. But as the only single sister of the 7 children that my grandmother referred to, she did not know how to cook, and she could not drive. So she and my father and Uncle Joe flagged down buses to get to Sibley Hospital, where my grandfather was. Grandma Floria had been at Grandpa Floria's comatose side for 4 days, awaiting his death, which arrived on Saturday, May 6th, 1944, 16 days before Grandpa Floria's 60th birthday. cause of death, cerebral hemorrhage, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes. Grandpa Floria laid in state at the tiny Frank Geyer's funeral home, 1113 7th Street, in an open coffin with cheesecloth attached from the top of the open lid to the front of the open coffin. Grandma asked the undertaker if she could kiss him. And he pointed to a spot. On Grandpa Floria's forehead. Many years later, Grandma Floria showed a handwritten in Italian note giving instructions for his funeral. No flowers, no embalming, just a quick and simple burial. Less than 2 days after his death, fans were running, and there was an overwhelming smell of flowers. And to this day, when my father was alive, he could not take the smell of flowers because of what he remembered from the funeral. The funeral mass was overwhelming to my father. Father Nicholas DiCarlo, the pastor, said the mass in Italian. He was very close to the family, who had been significant contributors to Holy Rosary Church. Grandpa Floria's coffin was carried on their shoulders and interlocked arms, Italian style. The trip to Mount Olivet Cemetery was a short one. Father DiCarlo presided over the ceremony at the gravesite. The community and my family lost a beloved man. After a gathering at the Hillendale home, Grandma Floria gathered my father and my uncle in Grandpa Floria's studio and told them that many people had promised to help, but they were only words. No one would follow up. They were on their own, and if they were going to survive, they would be required to do so on their own. And I would invite you to remember that my grandmother took it upon herself to become a seamstress because she knew even then, before she even married him, that if she was going to handle life, she would be expected to be able to do it on her own regardless. There was a determined look in her tearful eyes. She was right. No one came to my grandfather and my grandmother's assistance. Let me be very clear, no one came. Grandma Floria had to take a job at Mrs. Johnson's dress shop on the east side of Connecticut Avenue, just north of DuPont Circle, working with needle and thread and thimble in a small room in a back of a store to make ends meet. Grandpa Floria had no life insurance, and there was a sizable mortgage on the house with Citizens Bank. All of the people who received medical attention from Grandpa Floria no longer could be encouraged to pay, and they did not. Many years later, in the basement of the Hillendale home, Grandma Floria found a stack of unpaid bills from various patients, and she just rolled her eyes. She had to rent the second floor of the house and found another person to rent Grandpa Floria's office to a chiropractor, of all people. Meals were always taken in the kitchen on a metal folded table and always started with soup and then some pasta or vegetables. Meat was very rare, but they never felt deprived. Besides, the kitchen was the only warm room in the house because they couldn't heat the house because there was no money. Grandma installed curtains she made all over the windows and entrances to the living room and closed the heating registers. Heat was used sparingly. 1963. But I will hold on this in case you have questions. That's where all of the references to my grandparents stop until 1963 when my parents got married and my grandmother moved to New Jersey. So I will stop briefly in the event that you have questions. But this is the entirety of what I know based on what was extracted from the book. Everything else might be anecdotal or possible, but this is what I know so far.
But, Peggy, listening to your story, and what they never were victims. Mm-mm. They are a story of resilience.
Correct. They never took charity. They never asked for help. They handled it on their own because that's how you did it, because the war was on.
Exactly. And then, it's a lovely tribute, but it's also, I have to think that resilience DNA is also part of you, your siblings, mm-hmm. your father. It just makes you who you are, and it makes you see life a little bit differently, I would think.
I cannot speak for my siblings, and yet I can still speak for myself. I'm my grandmother's granddaughter, and I do believe that level of resilience came right through the generations, through my father, who pulled himself up by his bootstraps and educated himself and got himself, college was not paid for. He had to handle college for himself because there was no money. So, yes.
And it was also a very turbulent time in the world history.
Correct.
So it's a true story of resilience. Now, mm-hmm. Next I really want to know a little bit more about family memory and storytelling, but I know that they were very close to Father DiCarlo, who mm-hmm. is the giant of Holy Rosary yes. Church. We would not be here if it wasn't for someone mm-hmm. who truly is resilient and was resilient. Can you tell us a little bit more about Nonna and Father DiCarlo, or do you want to do that a little bit later in the?
All I can say is that they made constant references to Father DiCarlo and their friendship with Father. Since I did not know my grandfather, my grandmother made continuous references to Father DiCarlo and how close she and my grandfather were to Father DiCarlo, and how significant it was. They knew them very well. My grandfather ministered to them, and fast forward when we will talk about this, when it was time for my grandmother to go to take care of herself yet again, she invoked Father DiCarlo's name. So there's a story that I will get to momentarily.
That's great. It really set the stage in terms of, I feel like I know your grandparents. Mm-hmm. I feel like I know your grandparents. Mm-hmm. So we've talked about Nonna Sarina, and I believe you called her Nonna Sarina, Nonna also. Mm-hmm. And we have a lovely picture about her cookie jar and her recipe book. And yes. we know that you are an amazing cook. As a matter of fact, we were the recipient of that wonderful cooking skill of yours. And we also had a chance to look at the well-preserved cookbook that you have that belonged to your Nonna, with her handwritten recipes and her notes. And that your time spent with her is very, very special, mm-hmm. and I could see why. Tell us a few great memories that you have remembering her. And I know you talked about the Victory Garden, and that was so special, and it was such a part of history at that time. So can you tell us a little bit more about her and your cooking together mm-hmm. and what you remember? So,
as tradition in Italian families, at least in my family, when my father got married, my grandmother gave the house at 10310 Nagley Road to my father and my mother. And she, as tradition dictated, moved in with my uncle up in New Jersey. And that's where she lived starting in 1963. So she went to live up there in Pennsville, New Jersey with my uncle. And I would visit during the summertime. And my first memories of cooking really came at the hands of standing next to my grandmother during important holidays. She would make a lamb dish, a lamb roast in particular, and I was just so inspired by my grandmother's cooking. She would do a lamb roast where she would make a paste, and the paste would be butter, garlic, salt, pepper, oregano, basil, rosemary, and black pepper, and she would blend the paste together, and then she would take whole cloves of garlic in addition to the paste, and she would push the cloves into cuts that she made into the actual external fat of the lamb. And that is how I make my lamb roasts even today. And when I watched all this, I just was so inspired by her ability to do what she did that I was determined that that's how I was going to carry. I mean, as a child, I just was determined to learn how to cook. And I was determined that that was going to be, even as a young child, I was determined that was going to be how I carried the legacy forward. And I still do that to this day. That's how I do it, is principally through cooking. I can make that recipe right now without looking at a cookbook or anything. I can do her things. I translated her recipes from Italian to English and then made the cookies that she used to make. So another small story was my Uncle Joe told my grandmother not to get a big turkey for Thanksgiving, and she promptly went out and got a 23-pound turkey because no one's telling Grandma Floria what to do when it comes to the kitchen. He hit the roof, and I remember him hitting the roof, and she didn't care. She was going to do what she was going to do, and that was how it was. And so I kind of enjoyed also that my uncle might have been in charge of the house, but she was in charge of the kitchen. And to this day, my grandmother's photograph is with me in the kitchen, and her photograph is with me in the bedroom. As much as I love my parents and I love them, their photographs are all throughout the house. The two most intimate spots of my house, my grandmother's photo is in the kitchen, and one grandmother's photo is in the bedroom with me.
That's great.
So she's with me always.
That's great.
And so that's basically that's the cooking stories I used to make. And I made the pasticciotta and other Italian cookies, and I would mail them down to Florida, down to my grandmother's sisters. And one time she picked up the phone and she called my father. And my grandmother was still alive. And she said, "Don't tell Serena this, but these cookies are just as good as Serena makes them." And I found that as a point of personal pride, because it's one thing to translate from handwritten Italian into English. It's another thing to translate 6 pounds of flour, 3 pounds of butter into an actual recipe. And then using figs and all the other things, it was a challenge, even with the more modern conveniences of cooking that I had.
So yeah, cooking is the bind. Mm-hmm. Cooking is what ties us all together to our ancestors. I can share that. Peggy, let's take a moment now for some reflection and identity. And we know that Grandma Serena was very religious. Faith was a big part of both of your grandparents' DNA. We also have a photo with the prayer book and the crucifix that you have and that you treasure. And I think you've talked about this, but in a nutshell, if you had to have an elevator comment, an elevator speech, 3 minutes or less, how do you think your grandparents shaped the person who you are today?
I think it's just all very telling in this story that my grandmother talked about when she said, "No one is coming to help us." And I think I took that upon myself. I never believed a handout was coming to me. I pulled myself up by my own bootstraps continuously. I expected no quarter from anyone. And I expected that if I was going to be a success in this world, it was going to be because I did the hard work. And I believe that is not just of my parents, a gift from my parents, but definitively a gift from my grandparents. And it is a gift to work to know that if you're going to do well, my grandmother used to always say to me, "I know you're going to make good. What you do is the right way." And I took those things with me always, to know that hard work is really, truly the salvation, no matter what else is going on. It will save you every time. So that's really what it comes down to. Whether you are working in the kitchen, it's not enough to buy a box in the grocery store. It's really, how do you express love for people? It's the work.
Yeah.
Whether the work is in the kitchen or the work is at your office, it is the willingness to not let life tear you apart. You have to be able to rise above whatever life throws at you. And it's an interesting segue here, because my uncle Joe, with whom she was living, passed away at 59 years old, the same age that my grandfather died at, of a heart attack in 1990. I will never forget the scream that I heard my grandmother issue when we all drove up to New Jersey and had to tell her that my uncle had passed away. Grandpa Floria could have lived a lot longer, but didn't, and now Uncle Joe is gone. At the Requiem Mass and funeral, Uncle Joe was interred at Mount Olivet Cemetery next to Grandpa Floria. We took Grandma Floria out of the New Jersey home and brought her back to Hillendale, back to her house. 46 years later, a similar scene took place for Grandpa Floria. This time my dad decided to take notes of everything that happened. It was clear that Grandma Floria could not stay in Pennsville, New Jersey. She was 89 years old, she could no longer drive, and was experiencing difficulties moving around. She objected, she didn't want to, but we eventually got her to move to Hillendale. The contents were donated to charity or boxed up. Grandma Floria's medical records were transferred. She was not pleased. She was not a fan of an audiologist fitting her for a hearing aid. Personally, I was thrilled because I loved Grandma Floria and I thought more opportunities to hang out with my grandmother. The idea to be able to come over and cook with her or watch soap operas with her or tease her about, and I would tease her about things that absolutely never happened. So I would tease her about things, I would ask her questions about things that absolutely never happened, but I wanted to see her reaction. So I would say things like, "Did you vote for Mussolini?" And she said, "What are you talking about? I would vote for Mussolini. I never voted for, I was here." But I would ask these questions. I would think stuff up to just see what she would do. And it was an ongoing running joke to see what next question I could think of to just tease my grandmother just a little bit more. But she had a hard time adjusting to the old Hillendale home. She insisted on climbing stairs to the bedroom alone, even when we begged her not to. She would get her own lunch. She would take the stairs to take the shower, even when we asked her not to. Then she started looking for nursing homes because she just couldn't adjust to living at Hillendale. My parents were upset because they thought they'd done something to displease her. Grandma's faith was quite strong. She had gone to Mass every day when she was at Pennsville, and when I would come to see her, it would be Mass every day. So faith was still very important to her, and she could no longer go to Mass every day either. So that's, in order to answer your question, the faith piece was missing because she couldn't do it at Hillendale. Grandma Floria, all of a sudden, announced she found Villa Rosa Nursing Home, a Catholic nursing home run by the Scalabrini order with an Italian Catholic priest in charge, Father Anthony Dal Balcon, and in permanent residence, founded by Father Nicholas DiCarlo, Grandpa and Grandma Floria's old friend. Dad took Grandma Floria to visit. There was a chapel and Mass was said daily, which appealed to my grandmother. Father DiCarlo was in the chapel entombed in a vault. Grandma met Father Anthony and spoke with a few nuns in Italian. She turned to Mother Superior Idalina in front of my father and told her she wanted to be admitted immediately. However, there was no space available. She would have to wait for someone to, quote, depart, unquote. Grandma Floria got home and got on the phone with Father Anthony. She advised Father Anthony of her and Grandpa Floria's long-term support for Villa Rosa and Father DiCarlo. So she leaned hard and had no problem reminding them of the pillar of the community that they were, the financial support that they had provided, and the support to the community, medical support to the community that my grandfather, she called on favors that had been there for over 50 years. She had zero problem pulling that string. She told him that it wasn't asking too much to have special consideration, and she wanted admission before the family vacation in August. Grandma was calling IOUs in from decades before. Dad got on the phone and told Father Anthony that Grandma could come on vacation with us, and there was plenty of room for her. She got back on the phone in Italian and told Father Anthony she would not go to the beach, and she reiterated she wanted to be admitted before the 4th of August. Dad told Grandma Floria she was going to the beach because only God had control over the next vacancy that would become available, and then there was a waiting list. She responded, "I'm going to Villa Rosa." Dad thought this was incomprehensible because Grandma was living with us. She was surrounded by friends and family who loved her and had fun with her. Doctors were lined up and everything. Yet she wanted to leave and go to a nursing home. Dad said, "Pack up because we're going to Ocean City and you're coming along. You can't go to Villa Rosa until there's a vacancy." She said, "There will be a vacancy." "Mom, it's Thursday and we're leaving on Saturday. Please pack." "There will be a vacancy." The phone rang. Villa Rosa had a vacancy. Grandma jumped to the head of the line. She was invited and accepted. She was asked to move in on Friday, the day before our vacation began. Mom and Dad moved her in on Friday and took everyone on vacation in Ocean City on Saturday. We stopped by the Villa Rosa on the way back, and she was flourishing, holding court with the other residents. She introduced all of us to other residents and told us everything she'd been doing. She was stitching altar linens, knitting for the bazaar. We would take her out to dinner or lunch, but she was always anxious to get back home to Villa Rosa. Dad would keep her briefed on the sale of the Pennsville house so that she would have agency and she would give advice and instructions. Grandma was all there and had no intent nor interest to give up her position as matriarch, which now extended to the Villa Rosa. And in 1991, she passed after a brief illness. So that is really, that's really, it's the truth. She called in chips and had no compunction because she had gotten no quarter for all those years and she expected to finally cash in. And so she did.
Well, she defended herself all her life, and she wasn't going to stop at her age.
No one was telling her she couldn't get into something.
That is a great story.
It's
and
the truth.
It really brings it to life, and a lot of fond memories in this place around Villa Rosa. Mm-hmm. We have a few minutes left, Peggy, and we've asked a lot about the past. Mm-hmm. And now I'd like for you to let's focus a little bit on the future. Mm-hmm. And by that I mean, you and your father's generous donations have really enriched the museum's artifact collection, so thank you again. This interview is going to become memorialized as part of the museum's Marconi Project. Many people, including future generations, will see the exhibition at the museum and listen to the interview. Mm-hmm. And so what, if you could leave us with something, what would you hope that this future generation understands about your grandparents? And then we want to give you the last word. So what do you want them to take away from this?
I think I'd like them to take away, first of all, that they embraced and loved this country and the people that were in it. And when they came here as immigrants, they made a decision before they even set foot in this country that they were going to be significant contributors to the country. From the very, very beginning. They were going to not just take a handout, they were going to earn every single day that they were in this country and earn their citizenship and continue to be contributing members of society all of their lives. I think that's the biggest thing. And I would also offer that a lesson learned from all of that is if there's anyone who has grandparents or has people that they can, I would suggest strongly that you do what if I had to do it all over again, I would probably have made more time to get more information out of the older generations as much as humanly possible. And I would offer to the older generations within sound of my voice to not hold back on what you know about your life and how it was, because if we don't hear it from you, we will never understand. So the responsibility is twofold. The responsibility is on the younger people to make an effort to reach out to the elder generations that are still members of the Italian American community of Washington. And it is also upon the members who are still the elderly members and the aging members of the Italian American community of Washington, it is upon themselves also that they must make the effort. They must not sit there and say that they're going to wait for people to come to them. It is a dual effort. If one side isn't going to do it, that shouldn't be a reason for the other side not to step up and contribute what they know. I would just offer that that's the dual-bladed responsibility, not just to yourselves, not just to history, but to the country.
That's great. And Peggy, this has been just an entertaining, insightful, and heartwarming interview. So we want to thank you.
Of course.
And then we want to give you the last word. Is there anything else that you would like to say about their legacy, or about anything that I should have asked you but didn't? It's all yours.
I am honored to have had the opportunity to be here, to pass along what my father discovered, what I know, and I'm hoping, and I'm just so grateful for this opportunity. I can't begin to tell you, because this place is something I've heard about since I was a child. It's part of legend in my family, and I hope and encourage everyone within sound of my voice to do something to contribute to this beautiful tapestry of the Italian American diaspora in Washington, D.C. I really hope that you'll make that effort, make a commitment to yourselves. Whatever it is that you're working on, ask yourselves what actually matters in this world, what actually matters that you can contribute, and do that. And also remember that the people around you might have a story or two to share.
Peggy, on behalf of the museum and the Marconi Project, thank you for sharing your wonderful grandfather and grandmother with us and their stories, and also yourself. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you all very much.